Work session meeting to order, and Director Bruler will be here tonight, and Director Daniels is absent for the evening. So, Dr. Watts, I'd like to ask you to call upon Mr. Ray.
Absolutely. Thank you, President Vengadassalam, members of the board, Ms. Halley, staff, community members, and friends. We'll call Ben Rarick, Executive Director for Budget and Finance, as well as support by Lisa Tyler with Fiscal Services Supervisor to present our 2018-2019 budget revision for this evening. Ben, thank you. The floor is yours.
Okay. So if I could, before we get started, I want to acknowledge the hard work of both Lisa and Sarah and some of the members of the team who aren't here, who are both going through year-end close and budget revision at the same time. So the intensity of that has been quite something, and I want them to know that we all recognize that hard work that they're undertaking. And also, we've been collaborating with some members of our human resources team as well, who have also kind of been in a similar rate. What's the word I'm looking for? But up against the same deadlines. So there's been a lot of hard work that's gone into this, and you're just hearing from me, but a lot of people behind the scenes on this. Okay, so I'm also dealing with a little bit of, if I have to turn around and cough, you'll know why. Okay, so just briefly, reviewing the first work session that we had. Remember, I walked you through the reasons why we're revising. And we didn't get so much into the impacts of those revisions, but which revisions and why, okay? And we talked a little bit about timelines. So tonight we get into a little bit of our understanding of the impacts of those revisions. So you have an F200 summary document that I believe Sarah passed out to each of you. I realize that's kind of a pretty technical document, which is why we did a PowerPoint. So that's more for reference, and there's a couple places in that document where I've excerpted something into a PowerPoint. You'll see the same exact thing in the PowerPoint that you're seeing in that sheet. So, so we'll walk you through it. But that is, so if you're a school district, that is revising your budget in the fall. You use this so-called manual F200 process, which is kind of manifests in the type of spreadsheet you see there later. And so I'll walk you through that document and show you what the major changes are that are incorporated into the budget version, the dollar impact of those in broad terms, and then our projected ending fund balance based on this revised F200. Okay, so I have two slides back to back that illustrate something a little slightly different, and I don't want you to lose me here, so I'm going to show you both at the same time, okay? The first slide that you're looking at now is not changes in the budget. The first slide you're looking at is changes in our costs as a district, okay? Then the second slide I'll show you will be the changes in the budget, okay? And I'll explain why the difference. So the first slide shows a stacked bar graph. You got the bottom says 21.6, you see that? Second says 7, and third says 1.5. So net changes in terms, again, not the budget, but our financial position as a district. We think that the aggregate costs of the settlements that we've reached and ratified or about to ratify, we're all the way through at this point with all the ratifications? Yeah. So assuming those is $21.6 million. That is the both the salary and associated increases in benefit costs associated with increased compensation. We also saw about a $7 million movement in enrollment. So again, I understand why this might be a little confusing because it's part of the same graph, but when you're losing revenue or you're increasing costs, you're going in the same direction, right? So this is a net change slide. And then the final part is there's some adjustments in the amount of carry forward that will be, tried to spend as much of the title money as we could this year, therefore less money available in the following year, okay? So this next slide might be a little more intuitive for you, okay? So this is just when you look at the budget adopted in August, the 195, as compared to the revision that you're looking at now, changes in expenditures, changes in revenues, okay? expenditures changing at about 8 million, revenues changing at about a little less than 8 million. So you're asking, well, why the big difference? You see it, you showed me on the previous slide that the costs of the bargaining agreements were close to 22 million, right? So what that tells you is in the first budget, we budgeted for a lot of compensation knowing full well we were trying to budget for a situation we didn't know, right? So we budgeted for step increases, we budgeted for COLAs, we put some contingency in there not knowing what our situation is. So we feel like the net, after everything has shaken out, we have to increase our expenditure capacity, or we got to increase expenditures by 8 million. Similarly, on the revenue side, you got two things going on. One is we're not going to end 17-18 with $1.1 million fund balance. We talked about that last time, so that has a carry forward effect to the next year. And then we've lost enrollment, and I'm going to show you slides on that as well. Okay, so that's a good high level summary of the slide. That gives you, if you know those two things, you really know the big pieces that are moving in the budget revision. Okay, now this is an excerpt straight from the document that you have, which provides you some detail as to the movement in the different revenue sources and the movement in expenditures, okay? I'm not gonna go over those at this point, but just to say that the vast majority of the two things, loss in enrollment and increase in contract costs. And increase in contract costs is gonna ripple through to virtually every program, right? Okay. So I want to walk you through our enrollment situation. All right, there's also a series of slides here. Okay, you've seen this slide before. Okay, but it builds to another slide. So this slide reminds you that in September, month to month, and in October, month to month, we are significantly down in FTE enrollment as a district. But as we've also talked about, that's just 2 months. We're trying to do a budget for the full year. We're trying to estimate what our enrollment will be for the full year. So we take the enrollment from September and October and we try to extrapolate that to what our AA FTE for the year would be. Following me? Okay. So then that produces this, which is that we started the year with an AAFTE of a projected 26,015, okay? Using the data from this slide, we think we're gonna be about 701 students less when all is said and done on an FTE basis, okay? Does that make sense? Okay, so that 701 is rippling through that enrollment slide that you had previously and is showing less general apportionment to the district, and that explains the vast majority of the reduced revenue. Okay?
Ben,
Yes.
real quick, so does that percentage then in between those two numbers represent similar to what we've seen in other past years as far as the percentage of decrease between the starting number?
Oh, good question. So is our reduction from September to October roughly on pattern with previous years?
Right, just trying to
Okay,
see.
great question. I'm not sure I can answer that on the spot. I'm going to see. Do you know the answer to that? I'm going to let Lisa take a shot at that.
In general, I'm going to say no. We actually saw a further decrease in October, which is not normal. So again, when we see the November numbers, hopefully they're not continuing to drop, but so that's not normal.
Right, but when you made your projection for the F200, did you base some of that
Yes.
on what past years?
Absolutely.
Because I know we have a tendency to go down throughout the year. So I just trying to see what you used to come up with this
Yeah,
number.
so I took October enrollment and projected it out to an annual average, which is the same process we use every year to get to that annual average number.
Great, thank you.
Okay, so that gives you a good sense of the macro picture on enrollment. This next slide gives you a little more detail. So this, again, is an excerpt from what you have in front of you. I think it's page 2 or 3. And this is showing you how that 701 breaks down by grade, okay? And then we also wanted to show you that even as, so that 701 that I gave you on a previous slide, you see that number in the circle there, the top of the circle, that's that 701, 700, yeah, it's 700.8 here, okay? And then, but look below there, so we're actually, even as we're losing enrollment generally, we're projecting increased numbers in Running Start. Now, Running Start's kind of a different dynamic with us because just on the face of it, we get the money, we send the money. So more Running Start students generate revenue, but it also generates expense in the form of a contract with maybe Green River, whatever. To the extent that it's dropping our 11th or 12th grade enrollments, then it's not a net wash for us. So it's hard exactly to know the end result of, you see what I'm saying? Are these students who were previously full-time enrolled who are deciding not to be and to go into Running Start versus are these students who were not enrolled, who are now enrolled as Running Start students, has a different financial impact for us. But at any rate, we're projecting growth in that program. So that's why it's important to know which number you're talking about. So I'm getting you, I'm insisting, you know, we should focus on that 701 number. Sometimes on publications, you'll see that 635.8 at the very bottom. That tends to conflate some things. Okay. Just to kind of, that slide's not supposed to be in that spot. I'm going to come back to that. So based on the two big things that you've seen, changes in compensation, reduction in revenue, this is what we think the 18-19 fund balance situation would look like, and it's not that far off from what I thought it was going to be, so that's comforting. The picture to the top of the left is straight out of your document. I kind of created a little summary there on the right-hand margin, so I'll take you through that. Unreserved, undesignated, I think we're going to come in around 12.6. Okay. Total is 16. The difference being reservations and designations for a variety of different things. And then the board policy is 5%, right? So I thought naturally somebody's going to ask, well, what is 5% this year? What's 5% next year? So again, on unreserved, undesignated, and we're not looking at total when we're looking at the board policy. Unreserved, undesignated for fiscal year 19, which is the year we are in right now, would be 16.9-ish. And for 2020, it'd be 19.3. Now, I hasten to add here that, remember, this is that year, right? This is the year where we have that kind of non-reoccurring chunk of revenue that kind of creates this soft landing, as it were. But next year, and I kind of indicated it there at the bottom of this slide as what I'm calling a budget note. If you just look at OSPI's projections of how much local levy revenue and how much LEA, or the local effort assistance money, will lose, the combined amount of that is 14.7. So look at the fund balance number there, and then just look at not looking at anything else, what other state revenue we get, the fact that we still have some year 2 settlements for contracts, et cetera, et cetera. So the tendency might be to look at that 12.64 million and be heartened by it, and I'm just, cautionary note there is all I'm saying. Okay. Okay. So other things that are going on, I think, frankly, if you understand what's going on in enrollment and you understand what's happening with contracts, you understand this revised budget in broad strokes, but there's a few other things going on, okay? Remember, we sold our bond. So, and this is not in your manual F200, but when you get to the point of adopting a revised budget, you'll have to adopt your revised budget resolution. and that will include an authorization for expenditure out of debt service. So that number is now known and revised, and you will see that in the resolution. As we are going through this process, all the various programs. Now remember, like if you have a program in the district and you were building a budget for your program, you assumed that teachers cost 10% less than they do today, right? So now everybody's kind of going back internally. This doesn't necessarily affect the budget you're looking at, but just so you understand process here, everybody in the district is kind of rethinking whether it's LAP, whether it's transitional bilingual, whether it's what they can pull off within their budgets. They are rebudgeting within the confines of the cost of a new teacher. And so that's literally happening as we speak, and that's not insignificant. When I had spoken to you last time, we talked a bit about the possibility of making further reductions in MSOC, given the fact that we're losing more revenue than we thought. We didn't anticipate an enrollment decline of 701 students. We talked about that a fair bit. We've decided not to do, and also your helpful comments about wanting a process for that. We've decided not to recommend reductions in MSOC in this budget for a few practical reasons, one of which is the ability to pull off a process of that kind before you're going to adopt. 2 is we're pretty well into the year. 3 is there's other ways that we can monitor expenditures of MSOC, and we continue to, for example, allocate the MSOCs in thirds. That's a carry forward policy from prior years. But also, and I feel like I should say this as this was been a theme of all of our conversations, that we've really asked everybody in the system to really hold on for all of 2016-17, 2017-18, and we want to have to return to as much normalcy as we can justify under our current financial situation. And there are just certain things about the MSOC budget that, a normal operating school district relies upon that we've gone without for quite some time. So we're trying to balance these two things. And that's all a long-winded way of saying we've decided not to make any reductions at this time. I wouldn't necessarily interpret that as we're in a great financial situation, other than, we're trying to manage the situation in the moment. Okay? Yes.
You're talking about MSOCs. Are we holding where we've been, or are we going back to a former standard?
We're not revising our 2018-19 budget that you adopted for MSOCs.
Okay.
So what you've done
Right.
is done for now.
Okay.
As I've expressed to you before, I continue to have concerns about the long-term sustainability of our whole situation, but for what we could pull off in MSOC reductions in November, we're trying to do stuff that makes sense here, and it'd be difficult to pull off and maintain seamless operations. Okay, is that good? Is that fair? Okay. That was a team conversation. Okay, I am going to now go back to the slide that I skipped. So where are we at? As simple as that document is, that is the revised F200 general fund. That is it. And the reason that it is so simple is because not a lot of changes occurring here, and you don't have to go back through the full F195 process as a district. So we will send that to the ESD, they go through a review, and then you will have that document, you will have a revised resolution, and you will have a certification for the 2019 calendar year levy, which I'll talk about here in a second. So on the 10th, again, we went through the why. Today, I'm walking you through the what. And on the 14th would be the hearing, where we would hear from the community and hopefully adopt the revised budget. Okay. I mentioned the revised levy certification. So I think it's worth explaining this. You're going to see it on the 14th, and I don't want you to be confused by it. So I had to learn about it myself. Our budget reflects what we think we're actually going to be able to collect for calendar year 19 based on all of the factors that we know right now. That number, and this is not unusual, this is very standard, that number is slightly less than the maximum amount that we could collect from the state. Okay? So there's a gap there. I think virtually every district has this gap. So this is not an unusual Kent thing. This is statewide. Then the county writes us a letter and says, okay, and in this case, it's about $150,000, which is not a large amount for our levy, but there are administrative reimbursements, don't ask me to explain the full extent of this one, that allow you to increase dollar for dollar the amount that you can request from your voters. So you will see a difference on November 14th between the levy certification amount that you vote on and the amount in the budget that we're budgeting to collect. That is normal. The state will then roll back once they determine our actual property values, or all of the things that actually dictate down to the dollar what we can collect. They will roll back or true that up, okay? But the fact that those two numbers are different should not alarm you or cause, I think 295 districts will be going through a very similar process. So we might be able to collect a little more than we thought. It might be a little less than we thought, but that's the way that'll go. And I didn't want you to be caught off guard by that. Any questions about that? And apparently that's an annual process that you've all gone through before. I just wasn't here for it. Make sense? Okay. All right. So as budget revisions should be, we tried to keep this as simple as possible. It's really about two things. You're losing students, and therefore you're losing revenue associated with those students. You've adopted some contracts that we didn't fully budget for. That is the story of this budget revision. There's a few other odds and ends about debt service and some other things, but if you understand those two issues, you understand what's happening. And so myself and the team are available to answer any questions about this, but otherwise, we have, I believe we already have advertised for the November 14th hearing, and you would presumably hear from the community, and you'd have a budget up for your adoption.
All right. So we'll start with Karen if there are any questions and go down the line.
I don't have any right now.
Okay.
No, mine were answered. Thank you.
So I guess my only question, right, so when this is presented for the hearing before we adopt it?
Yes.
So I understand the format of the F-200.
Yeah.
But, and there's, lots of things as you look through here and see the different ones.
Yep.
As far as, is it going to be presented in any different way to show, yes, we have made those total adjustments, or where those fall in here more? I don't know if that makes sense. But I mean,
what
as
would
I
that-
look through it, I go, okay, we made an adjustment in transitional bilingual. Somebody might say, okay, why transitional bilingual compared to something else, or?
So, and we can. I'm actually not sure about the transitional bilingual one. Is that tied to the salary assumption?
It's all
Yeah.
based on the salary costs.
Okay. Yeah, that's what I figured it probably was, but I mean, it looks like there's certain areas where there were ones where it was reduced and other ones that it wasn't reduced. And
Sure.
So just.
So that one was, so
That's
maybe
under
like
state
slide
special
5?
purpose,
Like
right.
slide 5? Okay.
So just.
Yeah,
curious,
we
right,
can do a few of
how-
those.
Transitional bilingual is a great example, because what we've done there between the time you adopted the original budget and now is that we have revised we split split code those staff between basic ed and
Okay.
bilingual. And that, every year you'll find that split is a little different. It was, I'll say, significantly different between which staff we charge to basic ed or which proportion we charge to basic ed and which proportion we charge to transitional bilingual. And sometimes it's a matter of, we're going to charge certificate staff to one and classified staff to the other. And you can see it was almost a flip-flop of our rationale this year. So this, I don't think there's anything in here that shows you that, I mean, you would see it if we showed you a staffing sheet. You would see, oh, we were 40 down here, 40 FTE down here, and 40 FTE up in classified, so.
But it nets.
It nets, so, I guess on the 14th, we'll bring you more detail so that you can see that.
Well, that's fine. I was just, curious, right? Because if I'm looking at this, how do I know
Yeah.
the reasons?
Well, so we can walk through them if you want. Actually, Lisa and I just did this scenario. We can do the same thing. I mean, the enrollment's going to ripple through.
Right.
Right? So the general purpose and the state special purpose, I think, are both enrollment driven. The federal special purpose is two things. One is a change in the carry forward amount from the prior year, and the other is the switching of these staff from state funded to federal funded. And then, and is there anything else to that one?
Well, okay, so you're talking about revenue.
Topping up, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, good point. Yeah, okay. I'm sorry, that's wrong. So the top is revenues, okay? So the 6.4, and the 6.4 is going to be the drop in enrollment, right?
Yep.
The federal special purpose will be the adjustment in the carry forward, and what else? What's the second thing?
That's it, because we will have reduced carryover from last year to this year because of our year-end adjustments. So the first two lines are due to enrollment reductions. The $1.5 million in revenue is the carryover adjustment. And then we get down to the expenditures, which is, you can see it's by program. And so that's just showing primarily, one, the increased costs for staffing. And sometimes it is negative because we have our FTE in which by program may have gone up or down. So again, you probably need to see the level, the detail FTE by program to see the ups and downs and ins and outs. The net number will be
the same, yeah.
almost, net zero, but you can see where we've made adjustments. Let's see,
And the 10 will be essentially all salary, the 10.97, that's just all.
Yeah, that's helpful. It's just,
Yeah.
thank you.
So, I also wanted to ask a similar question, but I'm curious about the definition of carry forward. I remember when we talked, I think back in June, or no, recently at our work session, you mentioned that each school has a carry forward, and the principals could use that, something like $2 million. So.
We didn't recapture that money that's right.
So.
And that's still true.
So they are still going to be able to use that?
We have not recaptured any school-based carry forward.
Yeah, so that carryover remains the same. This carryover is related to primarily federal programs, some state programs, but primarily federal programs.
Okay.
That originally would have been carryover into this current year. But again, because of the year-end adjustments we were able to make to help our fund balance, we were able to appropriately charge some of those or expenditures to those grants.
Like titles, right?
Right, our title programs, moving them from basic ed to our title programs, thus kind of eating into that carryover amount.
Okay.
It's the very issue you were talking about, Maya, about like you and I were talking about in terms of strategically managing the balances and these. So when you spend some of that, when you don't want to pile it up too high, right? So if you strategically spend some of that money, that's great. It helps you in that year, but it's less revenue available for the next year, right?
Okay.
So that's a good thing. I mean, that was a good thing.
Okay, got it. And then did we do anything about some of those expenses we talked about back in June that are of, for example, like homeless transportation or sped, those kinds of things that are our highest cost? What were the decisions that we came on?
Okay, can I take just a moment to confer with Lisa before I?
Of course, yes. Textbook adoption, including licenses and
So,
the health mandate, K through health.
yeah, so we have, we do have, I will say, a shared commitment among all the team to kind of look at some of the areas where revenues for our particular program are less than the costs that we're incurring. It's a challenge because, like, for example, in the area of special education, our first issue is meeting the needs of the students, So, we're not going to save money if we're, it's not an issue of saving money as it relates to meeting the needs of students with IEP, for example. But we want to make sure that we're using a delivery model that is the most efficient, right? So we're not incurring a deficit unnecessarily, right? We had an initial conversation with our colleagues in we subsidize special education at a local level by about $3 million. More than that. we definitely, and that's not unusual, but for a district, in our financial situation, we need to just make sure, again, that we are meeting the needs in the most efficient manner possible. They're not necessarily any decisions that you see in that budget that are going to be different than the one that you adopted 3 months ago. But you can know that we have had at least 2 conversations about ways that we can collaborate on that issue. Again, not at the expense of the student. That is the most important thing to emphasize. I feel like I would just be kind of standing here thinking of some others. I don't necessarily have anything to report to you on homeless student transportation at this moment.
Yes, I'm just curious what we're doing to work with, say, for example, OSPI is looking at different type of multipliers and sort of
On the funding side.
multi-tier models.
Yeah, on the funding side, yeah.
side. Are we doing anything to push or advocate, at a legislative level?
Yes. I have not taken on a legislative advocacy role as part of kind of who's going to do what here as part of the team. I've got a long history on that issue. There's no question. Last year's not an anomaly, and Kent is not an anomaly. School districts spend more money meeting the needs of our special needs students than the state allocates, period. For some districts, it's more pronounced than others. We're actually under the cap as a district. It's in terms of our student enrollment, there's some districts that have a lot more students as a percentage of their population than we do. But we still spend, even with, I think we're in the 11.5% range, we still spend much more than the combination of federal and state money that is provided to us, and the state safety net is only a partial mitigation of that. So I can't speak to the legislative advocacy piece, but I can tell you that we are very mindful of that issue. And when I talk about, the budget side of it, I'm just trying to make sure that we're meeting the needs in the most efficient manner possible. But I'm convinced even there that more state funding is needed to be truly ample and to meet the constitutional threshold of school funding. So
I think just that analysis would be helpful because some of us are out there, advocating, and that would help the board members.
that we would be happy to provide. I can work with my team. Yes, please.
Sure.
So I had the opportunity to look at the webinar or listen to the webinar yesterday. So I hear that you're speaking to that. So now we, as a team, we are definitely looking at our safety net and ensuring that this year that we provide more applications and that we are going to up the ante on how many students we put forward to safety net applications to see if we can bring back some more revenue for those high cost students. So that's one goal this year, is that we will make sure that we are presenting more students for application for safety net. And it is interesting that they are looking at more formulas for our students per FTE. So, and this is how we did it in my former district. Out of state, each child, when we balance what setting they're in, what environment they're in, how many service providers it takes to support that child, and all of those factors, they're weighted a little bit different. So it might be that a child who's in a class not with typical peers as much, that they have more service providers working with them. And so, again, that would be a higher FTE for that particular child. And so, and I think there's some incentives, too, that the state's looking at for inclusion as well. And so those looking at the formulas might be, rather than just the compliance piece, it's interesting that right now everything has to be put forth and they just look at paper, not the students themselves. They look at the paper for compliance, and then that gives us that money for safety net. But they're taking it a step forward to look more at outcomes and also to look at how much it costs per student, because some students we see that are cost a little bit more than others when we look at those high-cost students. So we are very much aware of that, and certainly hope that with our new state director, it looks like they're headed that way, which would be great. So that would be a win for school districts. So
just think of us and also a resource where we can, together with
Yes.
staff, come up with
Partner.
whether it's a resolution, whether it's a letter to our legislators, but I think we need to take a lead on this.
Perfect. I would love to partner in that regard. So, yeah, thank you. Okay.
Thank you, Jennifer. And to that point, President Venkataswalam, know that Puget Sound ESD 121 superintendents also have a role to play with regard to advocacy. While the percentage, we know that resources are not infinite, but what Jennifer spoke to is exactly what McCleary did not speak to. So Ben mentioned the word ample. That's the limited foundational requirement for McCleary. Ample funding is not equitable funding, and that's what we need to make sure that we understand what we've described. If we weight our formulas, every student, regardless of how he or she is served, is not created equally. And what that means is that sometimes we don't want to look at our resources as more or less, because sometimes that's viewed as students are winners and losers based on resources. Equity means that we're going to meet our students where they are. This does provide us with that opportunity. So you'll be hearing more, and it sounds to me that you stand ready to be an advocate to support through our legislative officials. So we look forward to communicating that as well.
All right.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Yeah, I appreciate the question, too. That's a great topic for us to be thinking and discussing. I appreciate the question. I really do.
Thank you, Beth. Let's see. I think that was it for today. All right. Thank you very much, Ben.
Yeah,
Appreciate
thank
it.
you.
Okay. All right. So we will, let's see, it's 6:10. We are going to recess the work session for an executive session at about 6:30 for approximately 30 minutes to review the qualifications of an applicant for public employment. So we will reconvene at 7 p.m. here. Thank you all.